Deep in the bowels of the underworld, sitting upon the gates that which enter, preventing not the living to enter, nor the dead from leaving, is perhaps one of the most unnecessarily violent, ferocious, and recognizable monstrosities in human history. Perhaps one of the most unmistakable creatures when talking about mythology and any kind of storytelling is the triple-headed dog of Hades, Cerberus, or Cerberus. If you've ever seen Hercules, if you've ever seen any kind of Greek fashion story or legend, it's almost unheard of to not hear of Cerberus. For those of you who don't know, Cerberus is just basically the guard dog of hell. This is the giant, well, sometimes giant, sometimes not so, three-headed beast collared with serpents who scares off those who are living who try to enter and devours the dead who try to leave. Which, as you can imagine, just by that description alone, you can imagine a pretty terrifying and near demonic creature. Cerberus is the spawn of the older monstrosities known as Typhon and Echidna, not to be confused with the small, prickly animal that likes punching things. Which I don't understand how two giant monsters, dragon-like monsters, can come together in unholy union, and the best they can do is a dog with three heads. But, I'm also not the one who wrote these stories, nor is it of my culture or heritage even. So I don't judge. And I know I said I wouldn't do too many, Greek-based myths, too. But I figured, if I'm going to be drawing mythical creatures and entities and gods and things, I might as well do one. And the one that stuck with me for the past week or so has been Cerberus. Mostly because I don't actually know a whole lot about the Cerberus, apart from what I've seen. I do know, again, the basics, that he's a guard dog of hell, and he makes about as many appearances in Greek mythology as Hades himself does, which isn't a whole lot. Although wherever Cerberus is involved, it's certainly a lot more intense than his divine master. I do know that at some point in Greek mythology, Cerberus is a key element in the 12 tasks of Heracles, in that one of Heracles' tasks is he has to kidnap the dog for some reason. And I know a whole lot more about Heracles than I do the Cerberus, mostly because from what I remember back in high school, we learned about Greek myths for literature class, I think it was, reading, whatever. And there was a whole month's worth where all we did was study the Greek pantheon and their mythology and what the efforts were and the writing styles of writing down their legends and how they changed and evolved over the centuries as characters. I'm because it's technically history and mythology, which are things that interest me. I was kind of interested, but they didn't go into a whole lot of detail. We watched a few videos on the myths themselves and went over the writing styles, but as for the deep history of these characters, we never really went into. And I've never shared this on my channel before, but I didn't go through all of high school, mostly just because I couldn't stand it. I took my GED the second I could afford it, and I just said peace. Spent a couple of weeks taking classes there, passed with flying colors, and I did better in the GED than I was in school. Mostly because just the way school was a couple years ago with Common Core and all that. I couldn't get in. Having Asperger's on top of trying to learn this obscure, overcomplicated way of doing math and things, it only drove me further away from it. Of course, we're not talking about math right now. We're talking about mythology and literature and things like that. Which unfortunately I don't know, again, too much about this character, other than, you know, he's the guard dog of Hades. He's mentioned in various other literary works, like Dante's Inferno. Which, for those of you who don't know what Dante's Inferno is, it's basically a fan fiction written by a Catholic monk as sort of an add-on to the Odyssey and the Iliad, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I've looked at it. And there's basically what it is. It's this guy Dante goes on this adventure through the bowels of hell, the Nine Rings, for some reason. I don't remember why, but there's a lot of like references to Greek and Roman mythology in it. And there comes a point where they have to pass the Cerberus. So, you know, I'm really boring this one, I'm sorry. Yeah, there was references to that, and which is really cool because Dante's Inferno is written hundreds, if not a few thousand years after the Iliad and the Odyssey. I know that there is another story. I don't remember the name of the character involved, but there's a man whose wife dies and is dragged down to Hades. And he's so, you know, brokenhearted about this because he loved her so much that he actually goes on a journey to travel down to Hades to bring her back. And unfortunately for him, the only way into Hades, you have to go past Cerberus. And most people get torn to shreds when they try to do this, but this guy had a secret weapon, and that secret weapon was he was an incredible musician. When he played his harp, he could literally invoke emotions onto people that were so deep and so powerful that they had no control over, like, if they could weep or laugh or feel joy or anything, because the emotions from his music were just so inspired. You might say they were divinely inspired by the muses themselves. Well, as he goes to pass the dog, you know, it gets all aggressive, it starts barking, goes to attack him, but he starts playing his music. And it's so powerful that it actually causes Cerberus to heal and to stop dead in its tracks and just, you know, basically start whimpering, you know, and just laying there as any, like, tame dog would when it's watching its master do something. So he basically conquered this massive dog with music. And the music was so beautiful that it made even Hades himself soften his heart. He was like, all right, you know, I can see that you're, you know, truly in love with your wife and you're devoted to her. I will allow you to take her back to the human world. Which sounds really cool and, you know, is a happy ending, but Greek mythology never has a happy ending, and sure enough, the catch was if the man ever looked back to his wife while he was leaving Hades, she would be dragged right back down, because he had to go in full faith knowing that she was behind him. And he made it about... he almost made it out, too. He was right at the opening of the cave, and he just couldn't keep himself from looking back anymore. And the second he looked back at his wife, she was dragged back down to the bowels of hell. So, yeah. Greek mythology, ladies and gentlemen. Not what you read or listen to if you want a happy ending. That much can be said. I really don't know what the extent of the legend of Cerberus is. Is he just like the guard dog of Hades? Are there any other legends besides getting kidnapped by Heracles and punked by a dude with a harp? You know, I don't really know, because I don't, you know, study Greek mythology too often, like I've said in my other videos. I have more interest in Celtic mythology than anything. And I think there are certain examples of even like Abrahamic, well, of course Abrahamic, that's my religion, in Middle Eastern mythology overall that I know more than Greek myth, which is interesting because, you know, of how mainstream Greek mythology is, along with the Norse and Egyptian. But I think that's one of the things that kind of turns me off about those mythologies is they're the myths you hear about almost exclusively. You almost never hear anything about Native American or Vedic or Celtic mythology or anything like that. And these are stories and legends and myths of all of our cultures of the world. But for some reason, there's such this devout, zealous reverence to Greek and Norse and Egyptian mythology. Egyptian and Greek I kind of understand because there's a lot of esoteric symbolism from these religions, a lot of traditions, and a lot of ideals that are in our modern society. I mean, our capital of America, Washington, D.C., is built using, Greek-styled buildings and things like that. The textures, the materials they're made out of, the style that they're made is very Greek, and there's a lot of Egyptian symbolism too. Of course, if you take into consideration the Masonic origins of our country and things like that, as far-fetched as it may be, it's really not surprising. And maybe I need to do a little more research in Greek myths if I'm going to do this series. I should overall. I actually recently just purchased the Iliad and the Odyssey. I think I have the Odyssey. I know I bought the Iliad. Because, again, the Trojan War is such a renowned, legend. But the only thing we really have about it is, a terrible movie made in the early 2000s, which, from what I understand, was not accurate to the actual story at all, so I've got to go and read through that. The style I went for the Cerberus, getting into the actual art and what I went through drawing this, is kind of plain. I did do a lot more detail on the teeth. I made them look a little gnarly and yellow, and unkempt and vicious in this, so I spent a little more detail on that. But I didn't realize how plain the actual picture looked until I was done. As far as Cerberus himself went, there was a lot more detail I could have done, a lot more artistic liberty I could have taken, and I just didn't. So I'm kind of upset with myself on this one. It's the first Greek one I've done. Excuse me. And I kind of pussyfooted it. I didn't really, put that much detail or effort into it. But again, it's not the last one I'm going to do. So there you go. The three-headed beast, Cerberus.